We're recording today because a couple of the people wrote to me that they couldn't make it and they want to see the discussion on YouTube. So we'll be recording as usual. I'm hoping to use this arrangement. We have a new arrangement with the camera being a little closer based on what Bailey's Harbor did for their discussion. And I'm hoping to use this all winter so people can join us when you all head south to the warmer weather. So let me know what you think if you have any ideas about changing things around. I'm always open to new ideas. I want to point out that next month, we're starting a new list, and I have some brochures you can pick up if you want the list. They're also on our website. The next book will be Jane Austen's Society. Here's a copy for anyone who wants to grab it. Hasn't been checked out yet. And also John Harris has chosen a book, whoops, careful, for the history book discussion. And he has not set a date yet, but it's usually like October before he heads south. And I have started the book, and I really am enjoying it a lot. It's John Meacham's book, American Lion, about Andrew Jackson. And you think, oh, that's going to be boring history, but it's not. It won the Pulitzer, or I think the Pulitzer Prize, but it's really exciting. It talks a lot about the Petticoat affair, which I don't know. I was totally out of it for this whole period of history, the 1830s, late 20s, 30s. And it's all a big thing about scandalous behavior of women during this period of time, and people, how it really affected the country and the politics in the country. So it gets to be really riveting. And I really liked it, especially because so much happened as a result of that time period. My ancestors immigrated, a lot of them in the 1840s from Germany, and came in just after this period and were involved with the Mexican-American War. So the whole thing is brought to life, but it's really fun to read about the scandalous women and all of the society rules that were going on back then. And also it's really amazing how there's the whole Indian relocation issue, which Jackson's responsible for, and the banks were, he considered, very corrupt. And that theme is still, going on to some extent. A lot of the themes that we see in American history today were started back then under him. So I hope everyone will read it. It's so much fun. And join us. If you want to be on the list when he sets a date and time, I'll email you. There's a paperback there that you can sign you up and give me your email, and I'll put you on the history book discussion list. We do history books twice a year, spring and fall. So John Harris runs it. So
will it be a Zoom or in person?
I haven't talked to him about that yet. We might try this arrangement.
Okay, so it's what lion?
American Lion, about Andrew Jackson.
American what?
Lion.
L-I-O.
Yeah, John Meacham. So he figured that out. At first I thought it was going to be boring, but it's not boring at all. So I'd highly recommend it. So I want to welcome everyone who has joined us today. This book is really kind of amazing to me at the Midnight Library, because it's not brand new, but it's got a lot of holds on it. It's hard to get copies. Obviously, it's one of those word of mouth books that people are starting to read in book groups and all sorts of things all over. I had to request books from outside of our system for some people because they were in such short supply. So I know a few people didn't have a chance to even get a hold of the book, but are here to learn about it. So let's jump in. Matt Haig seems to be an interesting guy. He does talk. There's a lot of videos out there that I find really helpful on dealing with depression. And he has an earlier book that he wrote called, now I'm blanking out, Reasons to Live, Memoirs to Myself or something. It's a memoir to himself as a young person when he was in his 20s. Reasons to Stay Alive. When he was in his 20s, he felt suicidal, and he got through it. And it seems like a lot of his books deal with the subject of depression. So he wants to really present that there is a way to get out of it and to have a positive view of of dealing with it, which I think he succeeds in doing in this book. So I'd highly recommend looking at some of the videos that he's produced, just talking to people about depression. And I just want to know what everybody else thought here. I had no idea when we selected this list that we were going to end up with 2 books in a row that are so similar. I mean, did anyone have any idea Anxious People and then Midnight Library were the same theme?
No.
In a
No.
different way? But I mean, you think the title Midnight Library, it's going to be sort of mysterious, right?
Or light.
Or, yeah. So what did you all think? I liked it, to be honest. I know some people didn't. Yes.
I liked it.
Yeah.
The way I heard about the book, this is the second time I read it, and I loved reading it the second time. First time I read it, a woman I don't know very well in the community I live in Florida, a graduated living community, came up in the hallway and said, "Here, I didn't like this book, but I think you will." So I'm still wondering why she said that. But anyway, I thought this would make wonderful book club material, and I couldn't get our book club down there interested in reading it. So I was delighted when you said yes, and I think we're gonna have a great discussion. Thank you.
And anyone online, if you want to join in, just speak up. I think we can hear you pretty well. Are you hearing us?
Yes.
You are? Good. All right. Anyone else have a first impression?
I didn't care for it myself. I kept asking myself if this was a young adult book because it seemed as if it was written simplistically and almost like wishful thinking type things. The idea that she could just come into a life, say, and be a philosophy teacher and then sort of fool people seemed insane to me.
Do you think maybe that was one of the purposes, though, to reach out to younger people?
Yeah.
I also wrote down that I thought it was a younger audience would enjoy this book too. But I had to feel that I've always said that, who knows what turn your life takes, that you make a decision and then it's been a lot of years now, but looking back, I would say there's a lot of decisions I made. I went, I wonder what would have happened if.
Yeah.
So I kind of had that idea as I was reading it. I did enjoy it. I thought it was an enjoyable book.
And it was a book that kind of grew on me. I'm a realistic fiction person, and this magical realism, not so hot. But, as I kept going, I really fell into the story and I enjoyed it. But it was odd. It's to start with, I thought.
I think it could be a young adult book too, but I liked it as an adult because as I was reading, I thought of offshoots in my life, that had I not done this or done this instead, how it might have been. I kind of enjoyed imagining that as I read it.
Yes, Ruth.
Well, it may be magical realism, which is normally I don't care for either, but each of the incidents was really very real.
Exactly.
I thought it was
Yeah,
amazing
exactly.
how it caused the reality of those different lives.
It all seemed potential, put it that way.
See what?
It seemed potential. That could have been how her life would have gone had she carried on with her swimming or the music or whatever.
I think you girls are kind of cutting yourself short. Who knows what we might be doing next year? A decision we make today would be totally different next year. So I'm never going to give up. I don't think this was for just young people.
I don't mean us, but I think a young, say a 16 or 17-year-old could really enjoy this. And
Well, the world is still open to them in all possibilities when you're
More than me.
6, 17,
Yeah,
17.
Their book
You
of
know.
regrets is a little skinnier than ours.
That was wonderful. That was a nice touch.
very good.
Adele and I had a little bit of talk about this, and we said that who would your own personal midnight librarian be? Now, the librarian for that woman was
Who was
someone who-
Mrs. Elm to us?
Yes, Mrs. Elm was someone who kind of saw her through hard times and someone she turned to. So then we got talking about that. I really couldn't come up with anybody, but it was a thought, it was an idea, who it would be, someone that would be ours.
In my mind, I had, I know there was a librarian in De Pere where I grew up who was like the typical librarian of those, the old days with the braid thing that went around her head. But she wasn't especially nice and kind. But the idea that someone was kind and makes such a huge difference, I really like that. You constantly hear that a mentor can make a big difference in someone's life. So.
Well, and if this whole thing was in her subconscious, that was a person who stood out in her subconscious as the person who was going to guide her, hopefully.
What do you think about that one life where she was like really in a perfect life, very successful as a,
The mother and the wife of the doctor.
yeah, and a professor on top of it,
Yeah.
and everything else? What did you
Too
think about
perfect.
that? Too perfect, yeah. Anyone have opinions of that?
Yeah, I think that that life was still open to her because at the very end, she notices Ash bounding up the stairs into the gym, I think. And a thought goes through her mind. Maybe I'll ask him for coffee.
I was left with the feeling that they would connect and this life would become hers. And
Or
that
could.
dropping into
Some
it
of it.
didn't make sense because she hadn't lived it. It didn't feel real. It felt fake to her because she didn't have the memories. But by going back, she could create those memories and could truly be her life.
But I also felt that she was not really healed. She still had all the baggage and the regrets. And she knew some of them were not going to work out, but she still had mental illness. I didn't see anything at the end that gave me hope she was going to get treatment and pull herself together. I didn't sense that.
I kind of disagree with you, Adele. I thought she was kind of coming into acceptance about how her relationship with her family and, yeah, I thought that I got the feeling that it was a different person who was going to come out of that.
She'd experienced the loss of her
Loss.
brother, the loss of her father, the loss of her mother in different ways through all these different lives. And maybe brought her to a point where maybe her own life had more value, understanding how they would feel.
I wrote down one of my notes about self-acceptance. It
Yeah.
wasn't all her fault. That, it was, she could, yeah, I had a better feeling at the end, Adele.
I thought, well, maybe, I had much more hope than I would have 30 pages forward, but I hope she gets the help she needs to realize that she does have enormous potential, got a lot of skills.
Well, she certainly had great success in her alternate lives.
Yes.
What do you think, here's a question, what do you think about Haig's idea of success and the pursuit of its success? Is that an important part of her life?
It was a big part of the book. I
How to
think that
define it?
I mean, like the rock star thing and.
Yeah,
what everybody wishes for, be careful what you wish for, because when you get there, it may not be all that you'd
and the
hoped
Olympic
for.
medals and all that, is that success?
I mean, it sort of brings today this issue with the Olympics
Oh, yes.
and that young girl
Mhm.
and what she's going through. And she's making choices, seem very adult in many ways.
Amazing result.
Yeah. In spite of all of the pressure on her. But I don't know. Would you think that Nora's parents were good parents?
I think a recurring theme in the book, because Matt Haig points it out at the end and then through it, is living your life according to the expectations of others. Certainly her father would be number
Yeah.
one. But in other parts of the book, I felt that theme reoccurred. And like this book challenges us to think about, had we made a different choice at such and such moment in our life? I mean, could we possibly read this book without thinking that?
Mhm.
At the same time, it made me think, have I lived my life according to others' expectations, particularly parents or teachers or parental figures? And I didn't have the feeling that I had, but I could see in other people that they often seemed to be overly influenced by a parent or a parental figure, and that they had tried to live that life and it had never worked. I never thought of a time when it had worked out.
Remind me what happened to the mother. I read this a while back.
She had cancer, I
Oh,
think.
yeah, she passed away pretty early on. So parents can be either demanding or abandon children, and either way.
I
it's
think
a
her mother
tricky
also
thing.
had mental illness of some sort.
I don't know.
I don't
I'm kind
recall
of
that.
forgetting that part.
But wasn't there one scenario where her father died young and her mother stayed alive? Am I making that up now?
Could be another chapter. Made that up.
What about that scientific one? That was kind of interesting, I thought. Glacier, how do they pronounce it?
Glaciologist.
Yeah.
Please. Yeah, sure. Bear.
Studying climate change, yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty rugged life, but you know, it really, you don't think of it. You think of the high adventure and being this sort of special person doing investigation work out in the field, but it's pretty rough when you actually get down to it. So it does make you kind of consider, I mean, I fell into my choice in life just by accident in a way, you know, trying to avoid going to getting into real life, and I kept taking, you know, I'll stay in school a little longer. But it turned out pretty well. What does everyone else think about your choices? What do you think about your choices?
When I look back, we didn't have, you know, maybe it's because of where I grew up, but you could be a teacher, a nurse, a secretary.
Librarian.
And I don't know why that wasn't one of my choices, but, and then I would have loved to have been an airline hostess, but that was not considered my mother's choice for me, so couldn't do that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so teacher is how it turned out.
Well, and I'm of the same vintage as you are, and yeah, that was about our choices.
That was,
But I think the part that made this book so interesting is her choices were so varied and so kind of interesting, weren't they? You know, you really got caught up in the vineyard and got caught up in the glacier and all of that. I thought she had some wonderful choices, and I think that's what that's the author's strength. You know, he certainly provided some interesting.
And yet I thought it was
situations.
realistic. I mean, you know, young people have so many dreams and so many interests when they're curious. They just have so much going, and you sort of get stalled during life when things don't work perfectly.
Well, it was interesting that both the Olympic swimmer and the rock star were in her real life, very possible. Particularly the rock star, they already had a contract and were supposed to travel and cut a record and do all of that. And that, you know, that would have been the real beginning for ending up in South America and that Sweden.
Well, this is going to be made into a movie. Did you-
Oh, it is. Oh, that'll be an interesting one.
Yeah, it should be fun. The author also wrote he writes children's books. He wrote something about St. Nicholas or Santa Claus, and that's being made into a movie that'll be coming out this winter, I think, or this fall. So it'll be fun to see how they handle it, I think.
I was surprised in a way that the author was a male. It seemed the vignettes and as he perceived the main character, I thought he, you know, really, I thought he had a feminine take on it, but so, you know, looking at that name, I thought, yeah, it's a guy that's writing this. I suppose that's a sexist comment, you know, but I just.
Well, I was amazed about how in stride she took it. She was jumping into these lives and knowing nothing about it, and how she could function from minute to minute and had learned to cope with that.
And how she figured out by using the social media, who she really was at this moment. That was an interesting addition to the book for me.
And then what about when she disappeared, the person who came back in, were they left then without knowing what was going on and how would they react?
So I'm not sure anybody did come back in when she left.
But then who was there before she came?
That guy said-
They hinted at it.
The guy who had the experience doing it that she met up with.
Yes. that's
He
right.
said,
He
he
explained
said
it.
that.
Yeah, he explained how the
The
other person would
slider,
just
is that what they're
come in, be a little bit like,
called?
what's
Yeah.
going on, you know?
Yeah, the slider.
And for some of them, she was only there for a few hours a day, but in this instance where she was married and had a daughter, she was there for a long time. That would have been, that made me wonder what would happen then
Mhm.
as she.
Did other people find it excruciating when she was expected to perform and hadn't a clue?
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of times, there was one time, maybe there was more than once, when she was on a stage and everybody was looking at her and she didn't know the subject,
Isn't haven't we all had that nightmare?
Good teacher game.
That just brought to me a recurring nightmare.
Yeah.
You're somewhere, you're expected to do this and you haven't a clue. Maybe it's an exam at the end of a college class and you never went to the class,
Or you didn't have a senior moment.
Yeah, he did it.
And you're wearing your slip.
If you're lucky.
I thought that the author's skill in writing, what struck me was how in all the different scenarios, he had the same characters, only he approached them from a different angle.
Yes.
The brother from this point of view or that point of view. And I thought it was very skillful the way he created all those different lives. I like that.
I like the science behind it too. The idea of the multiverse. We saw that in another book, didn't we? What was that one? A little while back. But it is a real scientific concept that there are multi
People.
universes. Well, so it's kind of fun to play with that idea that they're actually going along, and it's a matter of time and place where you intersect with people. So it's pretty fun to think of that as being possible.
And do you think in the alternate universes, the choices that her brother and the other characters made then affected her? And because we know her choices affected them, but
Mhm.
I assume that their choices would also affect her.
They seem to, like, especially the brother, she and the brother were the only
Mhm.
two in the family who really survived. And sometimes he accepted that and sometimes he didn't like that, right?
Mhm.
Let's see.
Let's see.
What do you think your version of the Midnight Library and who your guide would be? So we already sort of
Yeah.
touched on that. Nobody has anyone that they can think of?
A librarian?
Now that's scary. I don't know.
She's younger than us, that doesn't.
Not that
compute.
much.
We're giving you quite a responsibility
Yeah. It's got to be teachers and things.
Even mom's parents, maybe,
Parents.
some people.
Grandparents?
Yeah.
Hi, Nancy, come on in. You're gonna have to pull up a chair. Nancy, I told Nancy was here the other day and I told her we were doing it's classified as science fiction fantasy. Does everyone realize that? And she loves science fiction and fantasy, so.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's see. What do you think about Nora's relationship with her father? Do you think Nora was right or justified to be resentful?
Parented both of them, in my view, harshly. He tried to put them in boxes and the box didn't exactly fit in either case.
Well, sometimes do kids need a little bit of push to do what they're capable of doing, do you think, or?
Yeah.
Something happened to her.
He was a rugby player and he did have an injury that ended his rugby business. And he was reliving himself through his daughter as the athlete. And parents really shouldn't do that.
Although parents also have wishes for their children, not so much that I want to relive my mistakes, but you want the best for your child. That sometimes parents don't see or understand that.
Yes.
But I do feel in our society, being a successful sports person, being successful in a sport, a lot of people identify it with money, college education, success,
And influence.
and it, yeah, so I can see where a parent would think, let's go that way. Yeah.
Why do you think Norah struggles so much trying to find the life she wants to live? Sometimes people seem to have everything and then other people never seem to be able to get quite on track. I mean, look at Britney Spears. You know, if you didn't know all this latest stuff, you'd think she was successful and famous, kind of like in the book, right? But what's going on behind the scenes, that's kind of interesting. Has everyone gone through struggles like this, or do you think you floated through life pretty easily?
I think these struggles are maybe a little larger than most people face, but they're certainly possible.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult to choose a really demanding career when you're that young and to just go for it. And this is my path and I'm going to do it this. And then what if you don't like it? These were all very demanding, most of them demanding careers that required years of school and continuing scholarship. I think that's difficult. She was very young. You don't really know yourself sometimes when you're that young.
That's when you need a mentor.
Yes.
I think in this country, we have more flexibility than they have in many countries. We were in England for a period of time when our daughter was 11. And the English children were having at that time to choose what they were going to be for the rest of their lives.
Tracking.
Basically, at 11, they were already being locked into the university path or the trades path and the things you were taking. Oh, you're not waving at me. I was just horrified.
Yes, I
remember reading
thought
about
that too. Yes, I have heard about that.
Yes, you're
Yeah.
It would be very different. Plus, when I think about all the friends I know,
While we lost.
and some people are just driven,
things.
being successful is what they're going for. And I know a lot of people who are just happy to be in the middle, live their life like this, so to be in that position of
Things for
having to be at the top. It's very
Torture.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And they would always want to back away from it. It's like the person who never wants to be the president, you know, and you're on the nominating committee and you're trying to find a president and none of them want to be a president.
he hear about?
But if you were trying to say, there are some people who
Nobody's
just are happy being in the middle and just being,
I mean,
No.
on the library.
Yeah, and that's a life.
And it is.
Life.
I mean, if you're pushed over here, you know.
Yeah.
There also have been such massive cultural changes. I'm at an age, and maybe some of you are, where your parents went through the worst of the Depression. And they want for their children was quite different than what they wanted when they were. I mean, I can remember my parents and other kids' friends' parents talking, you have to have something to fall back on.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
become a nurse, a teacher, a secretary, so you have something to fall back on. So it wasn't, my childhood dream was to be an anthropologist. Margaret Mead was my idol. But that wasn't, I mean, she was an exception. Women just didn't do that or study for that. And so it just drifted away with other things I would have liked to have done too. I mean, I don't live a life of resentment because I didn't have one, but I've always been sort of a closet anthropologist. But, it's not something you could fall back on.
Right.
But we got a couple more people joining us here.
Oh, fun.
It's kind of tricky to do this technology today.
Yes.
You're doing just fine. It's working well. Well, somehow in my notes, I wrote down black hole versus volcano. but guess what? I don't remember why I wrote that down. It has something to do with the book, though. Does anybody remember what that was referenced to?
Yes.
Oh, good.
The covers of the National Geographic, she always had.
Oh,
some
yeah.
right.
geographic lying around. And one of them, the cover, well, the one that always showed up was the cover of the black
The
hole.
black hole.
And of course, she thought, oh, that's it. The black hole swallows everything. That's me, blah, blah, blah. But in that issue, which was open near the end,
Yeah.
was a volcano. And she decided, well, maybe I am a volcano because volcanoes are full of possibility.
And
The volcanic ash, while it can destroy everything, also is makes very fertile soil. I'm well aware that most wine vineyards are planted on volcanic soil. And it produces wonderful wine.
Yeah, I knew you knew
And it
that.
says,
I knew you knew.
it says, and like a volcano, she couldn't run away from herself. She'd have to stay there and tend to that wasteland. She could plant a forest inside herself.
Good.
It may
See,
take a
she's
while, but it can
independent.
happen. Yeah.
What did you think about how the librarian fit into the story? And the ending? Where did she just die at the end? Or does she have her own?
No,
She's in a
and-
care home.
And Nora was going in to play chess with her
Yes.
regularly on the last page, I believe,
Yep.
which is a nice ending because it
Yes.
seemed for a while
Yeah,
like
she
she was
was
wiped
going to
out.
be, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I like the way the arc of the story that he brings it into a very sort of positive ending. Because it is I think it's a good book for young people, as we talked earlier, young people to read because it makes them think about their choices in life and how it affect them. And we did talk about how it's almost a young adult book, right? But the fact is he makes a positive ending. I read one review in Goodreads that said he shouldn't write books about suicide like this, but and attempted suicide. But yeah, I kept thinking I should pull that review out and read it out loud. Because I think he does bring up the subject, but then he ends it in a way that makes you feel very hopeful. And I think from what I've watched of his videos, that was his purpose, is to give people hope.
I was wondering about the meaning of the chessboard, because it begins with the chessboard
Yeah,
and ends with the chessboard. And it's her playing with Mrs. N and she's ending a game with Mrs. N. And I figured out chess is a game which has millions and millions of possibilities after the first or second move. It can go in a large number of directions. And maybe that is the symbolism of the chess.
Yeah.
I think there was another symbolism too that they spelled out. This is not my idea. Somebody, the author, through some character spells it out, and that is the power of the pawn.
Yeah.
Because I think that,
Slow but sure.
yes, that Norah, like perhaps anyone who contemplates suicide or feels a failure, felt like a pawn at many times. And Mrs. Elm and chess taught her that the pawn can be all powerful if it reaches the other side. And they didn't go into that, but if the pawn is able to reach the other side, which does happen in real chess, and then becomes the queen.
Another queen, yes.
Yeah, it's all uber powerful. And I liked that symbolism. I also liked that didn't get pounded down our throats. It was just kind of suggested as something that.
what about all of the philosophers in the book?
The
Do you think
Thoreau.
she would have made a good professor?
I love the Thoreau references.
Yeah. Well, that sort of plays into the whole global warming thing too, doesn't it? Which is the other theme in the book.
It's very timely too.
Yeah.
The thing about the pawn, going back to that, and it moving slowly but surely, reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Game of Thrones, which is, "What do we say to the god of death? Not today."
So here's a question. What do you think of Nora's decisions throughout the books? Are there lives you would have stayed in longer? or given more of a chance. Was there, what does everyone think about the rock star life?
Not appealing.
How about the philosopher? Of course, that seemed to be the best, but it was too perfect, right? The philosophy professor.
Well, I noted that when she was a philosophy professor, she was on sabbatical. I'm married to a man who was a professor, and academia is a horrible place to spend your time sometimes. So I think that it was lucky she was on sabbatical, and she might not have liked it had she actually had to gone down and dirty
Good one.
with other philosophy professor.
Why do you say that? What is so difficult about it?
Competition,
Yeah.
publish or perish.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you do something against the norm, which my husband did, you get punished for it socially all down the line. He would talk of staff meetings where they always, and this was by design, didn't have enough chairs. So that if you were late, you had to stand.
Oh, that's really bad.
It's, there's a childishness, not saying hello to people who are being ostracized. There was a shunning kind of environment. So it was brutal. It was brutal every day. And if you made a decision that went against what the others wanted and expected of you, you were punished for years for it.
My husband was a professor also for 5 or 6 years, and he became involved in a grade dispute that involved an African-American young woman who he had failed, he thought legitimately, and she brought a case. And that dragged on for 18 months with hearings and meetings and going quite up the dean, and I think even above the dean. It was one of the reasons he left, having to deal with that very unhappy circumstance.
Has anyone read Robinson Jeffers?
No, tell us.
Have you, Laura?
No.
Well, I suggest him to you, just like it sounds, Robinson Jeffers. And when I read him decades ago, he was at that time in his 90s and still very prolific. He has written a lot of books. He's Canadian, if I recall, and all of his books take place from the point of view of a professor on a college campus, a small college campus. And it mostly has to do with that kind of thing, the politics and the,
So much politics.
the politics and the politics of the campus.
Is that more so in that field than others, though? Is it?
It's such a microcosm, I would say yes.
I don't know.
I think there's so many egos involved.
That would be.
And especially if it's a state university, money becomes then an issue.
And tenure.
Tenure, oh, yes.
And grants, I suppose.
yeah.
in that money
And then the
all
publisher
time.
parish, that's just so hanging over them all the time.
So in some ways that life, it really did look perfect where she married a doctor and she was a professor, but now we can see.
Might not be
It wouldn't have
so.
been.
If she got to the point of having a sabbatical, she was probably already at least an assistant professor and had tenure. So she had, without going through all the steps, been through some of those hurdles of publishing and achieving, been on committees and so forth. She didn't say how she accomplished all that though, but that could have been blood, sweat and tears to get there.
Why do you think she felt so desperate in the beginning of the book? She seemed to have so much promise.
She got fired for one thing. That was the impetus, and then the cat died.
I was just saying the cat.
Oh, the cat died.
Those two immediate things, she was fired from the store.
She lost her one student.
Her
piano
pianist,
student.
Leo,
Yes.
and then the cat dying, she thought hit by a car. Although we later learned that it was probably natural causes. But there was probably steps going before that. I think the issues with her father had to have played a big role. And then him dying.
Causing her self-doubt because of
Did she cause
the
his
pressure
death
he put on her.
by her discontinuing the swimming?
And one of the few things she did in life at that time was to deliver medicines to her neighbor, and something disrupted that. You remember?
She hooked him up with automatic delivery and then he didn't need her anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody needed her anymore. So I think she had a
That's
lot
the
of
key.
reason to be very
And her,
depressed.
didn't her best friend immigrate to Australia at that
Yeah.
point?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then she lost contact even through social media, I guess.
Mhm. Easy.
A lot of stuff went kaput for her.
I'm sure she was lonely.
Mhm.
She felt she had let everybody down and there was nobody there for her any longer.
Yeah, and she was gonna get married, wasn't she? And then that
Walked away
fell
from that.
through.
That was also a good decision when she got back to that life. That looked right.
Yeah. Although it looked like it could have been successful in some ways. I mean, they had their little pub.
But he was not faithful to her. He was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering if one of the reasons why, and then again, this is all, out there, but the author had her live so many lives, was that she was supposed to take something away from each one. And so as I read it, I was trying to say, what did she take? What did she find out about herself as she went through each one? Anyway, it's kind of where I was going with that idea.
I don't know whether you all can see comments, but Jean made an interesting comment about how Nora's last name was Seed. The librarian's name is Miss Elm.
Oh,
Good point.
Look at that.
Very good.
Yeah.
never thought of that.
Sorry, we didn't notice. I'm having trouble with the technology today. It's a little complex here.
When that, an author does that, and then glad you picked that out.
Yeah.
Right over my.
So what is, the librarian's the elm tree,
And the
huh?
other
Yes.
doctor, it was Ash, it was the other. one.
Ash.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then when the library burned down, Ash was mentioned a lot. It was,
Yes.
Ash, yes.
I couldn't see what that connection might be, but
I didn't pick that up. till just
Well,
now.
a tree has branches and those are, each branch could be a choice.
Yeah.
And then they called it her root life. Remember that? Because I wrote that down too. She had a root life.
oh, yeah.
So there we go, Ruth. Oh, my God. Ruth.
I'm trying to figure out what's causing that side noise, but it's hard to know. Is everyone hearing us all right there?
Thumbs up, okay.
We'll get better with each attempt.
This is the first.
With this kind of setup, yeah, I'm trying to. What was that? I didn't hear.
Might have been outside.
Yeah, it sounded like somebody said Felix or something.
Yeah.
If you ended up in the Midnight Library, how would you handle it? In the beginning, she was like taking time thinking it over, but then later on, she started trying to come up with different lives, willing the lives almost, right? Isn't that what that other guy was doing? He was sort of like choosing
That slider.
Slider, yeah.
Yeah.
Slider, is that his name?
That's the,
I got,
What do you?
that wasn't his name.
yeah,
but
her name was
Hugo.
Hugo.
Who is in and out of the Midnight Library is a slider. I think that's the term for that occupation or that process.
Predilection.
Yeah.
What went wrong with that last life? Married to Ash. I had thought Mrs. Elm said that she would come back to the library and leave the lives if she wanted to. And that pretty much is the way it worked out. But she liked living as Ash's wife and mother of those children and the philosophy professor on sabbatical. And it got away from her. Remember, it was slipping away and she couldn't, my recollection is she couldn't stop it. So what happened? What went wrong? It was not according to the pattern.
Well, and I've got a summary of the book because I read it a long time ago. But this is interesting, talking about the tree business and sort of related to your question. Talking about her life with Ash being nearly perfect. And then she visits Bedford. She realizes how much she values all her relationships there and how much work is still left to be done. She returns to the Midnight Library and then to her root life at last, her root life. So tree roots. Interesting.
Here it says too that she hadn't earned it.
Yes, I was just gonna say that she didn't feel like she had the child herself and had, built that life.
Yeah.
That it wasn't really hers. She was kind of faking it. That's the impression I got too. But there were some of those where it even alluded to the fact that she drifted in and out of lives and we never really did know. Some of them, there was many that they didn't go into as much detail about, so. So I wrote down kind of what was the purpose of living all those lives? What purpose did that serve? And if we could ourselves, if you knew what was going to happen, would you have made that choice if you knew which way you were going to go? Who knows?
Did she end up in the lesser lives in the beginning and as she gained experience, do you think she chose better lives? It's hard to think back. Like when she went to Australia and was working at was it a swimming a guard or something? What was she doing there? I forget.
What's she doing?
That's true.
Teaching or she was sort of a loafer at that point, right?
She was much younger at that point, I think.
Yeah, but is she really younger? Isn't it supposed to be more where she's just hopping around it in the current time?
Yes, that's true.
Different.
Oh, but she becomes a lot younger. Oh, she is only 35.
Yeah.
Think of it.
I thought she was staying the same age throughout the book,
Yeah, maybe.
just going into different, if she had done different things in their past life, where she would be.
I think you may be right, because the clock being on midnight and not moving kind of thing, maybe that is true.
So that one life where she was Australia, right?
She was,
Yeah.
And she was kind of just a loafer who was doing odd jobs and not very serious and,
When she found out her friend Izzy had died
Yeah.
yeah.
and her roommate, I seem to remember there was something about her roommate that wasn't helpful.
So some she was very, very competent and some she was not. As we were saying, she was kind of faking the more competent ones.
Mhm.
But in theory, if she lived the life, she would have been prepared. So can she still make up time now? Once she starts again? Or will it go in a different direction? Do you think she'll end up with Ash? Does everyone hope so? Or someone, she didn't seem she liked him, but she didn't seem like especially in love with him or anything,
Yeah,
right?
That was my sense
They kept
too.
saying it.
It was comfortable, but not spectacularly a romantic situation.
Yeah.
After you've had the opportunity to restart your life so many times, will you never be satisfied? Will you always want to try that? I think about some people I know and their husbands. I'm like number 4 and I think, okay.
Maybe this'll.
Maybe.
I don't know if she was going to end up with Ash, but I think she did learn something. She was thinking about doesn't she say maybe I'll invite him for coffee? I think that she now had the confidence to do it, and I think that she will commit to whatever she did.
Is it timing out?
Someone's leaving, Ronnie's leaving. He says, thanks for the nice chat.
I don't know how you can do 2 things at once. You need to have an assistant.
Yeah.
You need to have a techie.
Well, we were over here. We were. Pointing.
Well, I think this is better than the last meeting where we had it up there, so every time I'll try to, how's that? We'll figure this out. Because a lot of you won't be here.
No.
In
one
the
more month
winter.
and I'll be gone, yeah.
So,
October.
well, where were we? Are we nearing an end now? It's
break.
going on 2:00.
Okay, let me finish what I was going to say. I
Yeah.
think the one thing she did learn, and maybe we did learn too, was that when you think that something was good to you, commit to it, at least for a while. And I think that she might have ended up with Ash, but it wouldn't have been because of some lucky thing. It would have been because she maybe thought, this might be a life that I could be comfortable in. And so I'm going to invite him for coffee. And then I think she would have been more aggressive, been more committed and not backed off. Like we got an impression that she was, every time things got a little what? Intense of any kind, she backed off. And that was the one thing, is to grab onto it. And I think our author says that a few times, maybe in the voice of the author.
I think there was a Thoreau quote that seemed to apply that too. I just looking to see if I could find it, but I can't. But Thoreau had something about knowing when to go forward and when to wait.
Okay.
And what in the book, was Ash a doctor when she met him and he asked her for coffee or whatever that was?
He brought the cat. That was the first, he brought
No.
the dead cat in. wasn't
First
it?
time was at String Theory. He came to buy a
Oh, yeah, to buy something at the
music.
store.
Mhm. He wanted to learn some musical.
And asked her for coffee, and Dan, her fiance, got very upset, wasn't that?
Well, she was afraid he would.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, that's,
And if she was the same age in all of those lives, she must have been asked out by Ash quite a bit earlier in order to have had a child and who had grown into to a certain age.
Yeah, so he's playing with the timing there.
Yeah, I think so.
I think
The
so.
magical part.
so loud.
But he's a good storyteller, that's for
Yes.
sure.
Very skilled.
Does anybody have daughters or daughters-in-law who have read this and you've talked about? I'd really like to get, say, a 30-something
Yeah.
take about how they, or even less, how they viewed this book, where they have a lot more forks in the road. And we, as we say, are not quite, but sort of forkless.
More spoons.
Not fork.
That last little twig.
But there's always a bud at the end. My daughter told me today she just finished it.
And her comment, Benny?
She liked the book. She thought it was very pleasant. She thought it was summed up too succinctly at the end. She wished there was a little more left for us to discover for ourselves what his message was instead of having it so
And may I
neatly
ask her
described. Pardon?
May I ask her age?
She's around 35. I have to do the math.
That is, I've only done it twice where I've met with high school or a little bit older kids and discuss a book. Our perspectives, the older people, coming to a book, is totally different perspectives, but it is enjoyable to do.
Have you ever read a book at two different times in your life?
Well, yeah.
Because that,
If I
you know.
remember. But yeah, but it is interesting because, especially if it's not a relative in some ways, Adele, because they're more open. They're not,
Yeah.
your own daughter's gonna be, I don't want to tell my daughter some things anyway, so my regrets, I don't want her to know. So, it might be interesting. Every once in a while, it is a fun thing to do. Get hold of some of those kids.
For a while, we had some high school kids who were going to come a few years ago. Do you remember that, from Southern Door? But that didn't
pan
pan
out.
out, unfortunately. And Ephraim has done a number of book groups with high school
Adults
kids and
high school,
adults.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a story a little off topic?
Sure.
My 9-year-old grandson invited me to join his new book signing club. It was 3 boys and me.
Ah.
I was so excited.
Oh, my God.
And they chose the book A Bridge to Terabithia.
Oh,
Which for a 9-year-old, I looked at my
Yeah.
daughter and I said, do you remember what happens in that book?
Yeah.
And she said, that's what the other mother wanted. So it was my job to come up with questions. But what I learned was you got 15 minutes of conversation, 15 minutes of wrestling. It was my most fun night of the whole summer. And they came up with some incredible insights for children that we've got holes coming up next.
During COVID, my 12-year-old grandson and I shared books.
That's
I
great.
allowed him to pick, and that was very instructive, how he viewed books and I viewed books. And it was very interesting.
It's interesting, the titles, Holster. I mean, that was when I was teaching, those were hot thing. That was back in the.
Well, I
that was a long
suggested that
time
one, so that's why it's
Oh,
an
maybe
old
that's
book.
what I'm gonna say.
The boys came up with some other books I haven't read. Like, one was Pax.
Okay.
and
Captain Underpants.
they all read Captain Underpants, but I'm not sure that's what they're bringing to the group.
Yeah, not too much depth there.
So what age group would be the best for this book? I mean, I can see younger kids even.
I've seen middle school.
You think
for
the
sure.
30s or something where they're
No, I think
branching out, but
teenagers.
I'm not leaving yet.
because that's the hard part of life when you're an adolescent and you're going through the real changes.
Aren't they
You
saying
don't
the
know where to
suicide
go.
rate too among the middle school, early high school age is quite a lot?
But they have yet to make I think the important life-changing decisions like who to marry, whether to go to graduate school, what to do for a job. So it might be really interesting to get their take on this.
Yeah. At this point, they probably have parent influence a lot. If, let's say a middle schooler, as far as why you have to get good grades, because you have to get to this kind. I would have parents in third grade say, do you think they're gonna do well on their SATs? And I'd go, God knows, you know, we'll ask me in 10 years. But so I can see what you're saying. It's true about that.
Well, I guess it's time to wrap up. Thank you all for coming and thank you for joining us online. We'll try this again next month and I hope I can manage the technology. When does everyone head south? In general?
I will be here in September, but then I go in October.
In October?
I leave in November or.
Yeah, me too. November.
So we'll have you here a little bit, some of you here.
I'll be here. If the kids didn't have a
I'm
not going
come down and want to swim in the golf, and I have to be there.
Or how many people can you,
Yeah.
get on that screen? How many people can?
Oh, you can get a lot of people. It's hard to say if you're doing just a Zoom program. Up to
Oh,
100.
their
Small
picture, just photograph, just.
I would like to push that.
Yeah.
And whoever's talking online, it'll jump to their picture, so that the person who's speaking, you'll be able to see.
Different views.
Same
See
button.
how it's got the yellow outline?
So
Yes.
As we're talking.
Oh, got it.
Whoever's
back.
speaking, that would be a speaker.
Oh,
Okay.
she can bring
November.
someone
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
I get it.
So
You know, the leaves
when
meeting.
a lot of the people are going south, then they can join us this way this
Oh,
year.
how great. That's nice.
Which, we did a little of that last year, of course. We did everything with Zoom.
Yeah, exactly.
But now we're trying a hybrid version, so
Right,
we can,
sure,
so everyone
sure,
can
of
stay.
Thank you.
Oh.
Also, thank you for allowing me to join you today. Thank you,
Thanks
Jane.
for coming.
Yeah, bye, Karen.
Yeah.
It's been fun. I enjoyed it.
We'll see you Monday.
Do you know Karen? Is this someone?
She's Jane, knows Karen.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Where is she from?
She's living in she lives in Iowa in the summer and she's my neighbor in Florida in the winter. And she's our Zoom guru.
She's what?
She's our Zoom guru. She does 2 Zoom meetings for 2 book groups.
Okay.
It's good to read them again.
Yeah, bye.
And there's a lot of overlap.
I can't
This book is gonna be for the other one.